Welcome to the TINAH Talks podcast, where time is not a healer, but we do believe that we all have the power to heal ourselves and take our mental well-being journeys into our own hands. This podcast is a byproduct of TINAH, the mental well-being marketplace and community platform, providing you with the best products for your self-healing journey. Hit subscribe and follow us on socials if you want support on your mental wellbeing journey. We're your hosts, Sophie and Kelsey, and this episode is all about stress and how you can get yourself out of fight or flight mode if you've been living in it. So I was actually living in fight or flight mode for most of my life, definitely most of my teenage years and quite a lot of my adulthood. I'd say probably up until the age of about 29, 30, I felt like I was living in fight or flight mode. And that for me felt like I was either living at 0 or 100. And I really didn't have that much in between. It was very much like I was all in or I was all out of everything that I was doing. And that could cause me quite a lot of stress, quite a lot of anxiety. I felt like everything that I was doing, I was either like super, super happy with, super, super annoyed at, or like just didn't want to do it at all. So it was like one of those things where if I felt stressed and my cortisol levels were rising, for example, I would be kind of in chaos mode or hermit mode. I couldn't really find that balance in between. And I think when we talk about fight or flight mode, that's kind of, it's one end of the scale, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the ends of the scale or the other. Is that the right explanation? Or please?
So no, not always. Like fight or flight isn't necessarily one end of the spectrum or the other. Fight or flight is this just the reaction that you have to stress. And right now, in like a lot of psychology research, they've come out with there's actually different stages. So you can either have like a flight response, you can have a fight response, you can have a fawn response. So that's just the type of response that you're having, and that doesn't necessarily mean all or nothing. But I was going to ask you, I'm curious, like, how did you realize, because for you, it seems like you either ping between fight or flight, like you completely shut down or you're like really go, go, go. What was the moment? And maybe there wasn't, but was there a moment in time when you realized like this is how you were functioning on a regular basis, that like, you're like, oh crap, this is what's happening with my stress and my cortisol levels.
Well, yeah, I think it was actually a conversation with you. So for context, me and Kelsey met when we were both living in Bali. We were both working on our businesses. We often had co-working sessions together. And the co-working session that we had, I came to you and I was like in a full-on like fight mode.
Yeah.
And just like was struggling with everything. Nothing was making sense. My whole business felt like I needed to change. I was like very much like, no, I'm starting again. I'm going to scrap it all and start from the beginning. And that was me in fight mode because I was struggling with stress. I didn't know how to manage it. So I was just like throwing what I thought were solutions at problems, but they weren't solutions. I was just causing myself more stress and chaos. And I think we had a conversation about that and you were like, whoa, like, do you really need to start your whole business again? Come on, you've been doing this for like years now. You should really not do that. Like, let's see what you can do to pivot it. And I think it was at that point you'd kind of explained to me what fight or flight meant properly. And for me, like I said earlier, like I always thought of it as 0 as 100. And I've been to so many therapy sessions where I've said to my therapist, you know, I don't know how to live in this middle ground. I only know how to live at 100 miles an hour or not at all. I really struggle to be in this middle neutral place. And I think obviously we had that conversation, and then I also went to another like kind of workshop around like mindset and making decisions from a neutral mindset. And all of that then for me around that time started to fall into place. And I was like, oh, okay, I've been living in fight or flight mode. I didn't even know that was what it I had always heard the term and I kind of understood what that meant, but my interpretation had always been that 0 or 100 kind of reaction to everything I was doing.
That's really interesting because for me, my stress levels and my fight flight, so basically what's happening is when we're responding to stressful situations, it's called a stress response. And we're basically triggering our autonomic nervous system, right? So it's the sympathetic system, which then like produces like cortisol. And that's where we get into that place of response, whether it's fight, flight, fawn, whatever it is. right? For me, so like I come from a background where I had a lot of stress in my younger years. There was a lot of turmoil and trauma in my household, like since I was a child. So all the way up. And it wasn't until I think that, right, even when I was out of the household at 18, I mean, I actually ended up on my own at 16, but I was still dealing with all the things that was happening in my family, and it was still very heavily prevalent. So I was still very much so in that activated state. It wasn't until I went away to school and I was in college, I graduated, I did all the things that was expected of me. I got my big girl job, the whole thing. And I was like, hell yeah, like I made it. I got out of that like really fucked up environment and I did the things to be a functioning adult in society. And then all of a sudden I started, and there were still some things happening. My dad ended up being very sick, and I started having anxiety attacks, which I had never had before. And then my mood completely plummeted and I hit a depressive episode and I couldn't, now mind you, I come from the psych field. For those like who don't know me, I used to work in inpatient psychiatry. I was a mental health specialist. I studied psychology in school. So I was in that role for many years. I no longer do specifically that, but so I recognized what was happening to me as it was happening, and I knew where to go for resources and help. But it was like all of a sudden I'm having all these things and I was so mad. I was like, what the fuck? I'm out of like the true trauma. I've done all these things for myself. I'm finally in a safe place. And I went back to therapy. And that was when I realized, right, your body can't process what's happening until you are in a safe place. So
Yeah.
during all that trauma and everything, I was in that chronic state of stress response. And then when I was finally in a safe place, I started like the breakdown. My body and mind was finally processing everything. And that was like my first moment of being like, oh, okay. So I've just been functioning in a stress response for the last 23 years of my life. And it from there, that's what triggered my healing journey of like really needing to work on myself. I'm someone who, right, we'll kind of like hop into this. Maybe it might be a good time to go into the question of, what is cortisol and why has it been dubbed the stress hormone? If it's okay with you, I'm going to run away with that.
Okay.
So cortisol is part of like the glucocorticoid. I always mess up that word family. It's a steroid hormone. It's produced, I believe, from the adrenal glands that sit right above the kidney. But it plays a function in many aspects of our body down to multiple different cellular levels. And it's produced in response to stress. And it can be good up to a certain degree, but when you are producing high levels of cortisol over very long periods of time, basically it fucks you up. It causes a lot of issues. And one of the responses for me was it really messed up my immune system. And so I found that I would get severely sick like in an abnormal amount of times of year. So like not only was it like once I was in like kind of a safe space that I recognized my body was shutting down, I went into a depressive episode, I was having anxiety attacks, but I was also getting sick all the time. And that's when I was like, oh my God, what is
Uh,
happening? And it comes from the cortisol, which is dubbed the stress hormone. So it comes from that in the internal systems that are happening.
yeah, and that makes sense. And what happens when your cortisol actually spikes? Like, what kind of physical and mental effects can you kind of expect if you were to go down, if you were to have that happen to you?
Right. So mind you, like our cortisol spikes regularly in our body, and that's like a good thing. It's just when it's spiked over a very long period of time and there's never really a reprieve and our body isn't able to move into that relaxed state. So when you're having like long-term high production of it, that a lot of times it can present in terms of like anxiety, depression, digestive problems, headaches, heart disease,
Yeah.
sleep problems, weight gain. A big one is memory and concentration issues. Like, so ADHD people, I see you. Like, I have like a low level of ADHD, but my memory is completely trashed. I don't remember periods of time of my early life. And even now, sometimes I have difficulty remembering things. And then the biggest one that I mentioned for me was the weakened immune system responses.
Yeah.
Have you had any of those for you that you've
Yeah.
recognized?
That's why I was wondering, because I've had so many of them. Like, I remember in my early 20s, like late teens, early 20s, I thought I had IBS, let's say, because I
Yep.
had like, so many digestive issues, and I was really struggling with, I cut out gluten, like all the standard things that the doctor's like, try this, maybe you've got dairy allergy, maybe you've got that. And I was like, right,
Right.
try all of these things. And it was before for context, I didn't go to university. I went straight out of school into work. So when I was 16, I went straight into jobs or internships, and then I finally got a job as a buyer at Ralph Lauren. And I was working in Ralph Lauren, and I was so like buying is quite a high stress job anyway, because
Right.
you're managing big budgets. It's for these big corporate companies. There's lots of expectations of you. You need to achieve certain goals, right? So it was a stressful environment. It's like I didn't really have that kind of life experience of university, of like fending for myself. I'd literally come out of school, go straight into work. So I had never really learned how to manage any stressful situations because I was living at home. Like it was quite easy.
I was going to say, fun fact, I think most of us, like, I know you're talking about your job and your experience, which,
Yeah.
like, I feel for you, that sucks. But I think none of us, this is something that I think just now as society, we're getting better, but none of us are fucking taught how to deal with
No,
stress in an appropriate
no.
way.
Absolutely. So I didn't know that like digestive issues might have been linked to stress or might have been linked to anything else. So I actually got to a point in that job where I was like, do you know what, I need to go and do something for myself. Like I suddenly realized I'd always been doing things for other people for like the job. My priority was the job at the time. So I
Yeah.
decided to leave and go traveling. And I remember I went to Australia and like traveled around Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, when I was 21 or 22, and suddenly I had no digestive issues. I was like, oh, that's weird. Like I've been cured. Like I don't
Yeah.
have these problems anymore. And then
Yeah.
I went back, like let's say 6, 7 months later, I went back and I actually managed to get the same job back. And I went back to work, and crazily, all my problems came back again. All of my
Magically
physical
appeared.
digestive problems came back, and I was like, "That's weird." Like I haven't had that for 7 months. But again, at the time, I didn't have enough education around stress to understand what that was. I just thought, oh, like maybe the food was different in Thailand. Like obviously it's different in Thailand, but the different environment was impacting me so heavily. And I can see that even now. Like if I'm very, very sensitive to environment. If I'm in the wrong environment, I get all sorts of different flare-ups in my body because
Yeah.
my body is stressed. The other thing I definitely have experienced throughout this, like I had a depressive episode when I was 26, 27 years old. And from that time period, exactly what you said, I have barely any memories. Like the memories that I have are only things that maybe like were that 100% happy or 100% sad. Like the day-to-day normal memories, I don't have any of them. So that's
Yeah.
quite crazy to me. And then even when I go through, like I can tell now, like when I'm getting burnt out, stressed, something's going on with my cortisol levels because I start forgetting things. And I've traditionally always had a pretty sharp memory, but ever since that time when I was 26, 27, I had a pretty bad depressive episode. I've really struggled with memory. Like it's been a bit of a problem for me. But so I can really see the time before and after of how that's impacted me on a physical level.
Yeah, it's just wild. I wish we got this education early on because I think it would make a difference. Like, we can't stop life from happening to us, right? Life is always going to happen. Adulting is hard. And so being able to have the tools early on to recognize like how we are responding to stress, what do we do when we're under really high levels of pressure and stress? And then how do we, move through it and get onto the other side and take care of ourselves is really important. And it's just unfortunate that like we're not learning, which I guess, is why we have TINAH Talks and why we started the TINAH community. Because I think it makes a difference for people to be able to talk about this and it not to be stigmatized, right? Like we're all in the shit together. And it'd be nice to just have that additional support outside of professional services, right? Professional services are needed 100%. And we are not a replacement for professional services, but like we could all support each other and, share our experiences, what's worked for us, and have a community that rallies around this type of education.
Exactly. And one of the reasons obviously why we started TINAH was because we want to make it feel more human. We want to make it feel like a human
Yeah.
conversation, because sometimes there still is, even today, there's still stigma around talking about mental health. And as part of our research for TINAH, we've looked into this, and like so many of the people that gave us feedback were saying that they still wouldn't go and get help, or wouldn't want to talk about openly about their mental health conditions because of embarrassment or stigma surrounding that. And that is
Yeah.
what we're here to do basically with these conversations, is to open the conversation and be like, we're just two normal girls, right? Like, we've struggled
Yeah.
with ourselves, all sorts of different mental well-being challenges for ourselves. We know that other people struggle with that as well. We want to open that conversation and make it feel like a more casual topic to help you get the help that you need, essentially, and also educate you, because ultimately the starting point of you getting the help that you need is the self-awareness stage. So even if like you didn't realize you were stressed, so when I was saying back in when I was 21, 22, went traveling, had all of these gut issues, I didn't physically realize that I was stressed. I didn't consciously say I am
Yeah.
stressed, but I knew that there was something happening that wasn't quite right with me. Somebody listening might be at that point right now as well, and be like, oh, actually, I've been having really bad digestive issues and memory loss. Maybe stress is the cause, and that's when you can go down that route of educating yourself better on what is happening to your body, because sometimes it's just a lack of understanding, and you just don't know
Yeah.
how to cure it. And obviously, if you go to a doctor or a therapist, maybe the full picture isn't being shown to them, so they might not necessarily diagnose you in the right way either. Because I've definitely been to many doctors for various different things, health conditions, and I'm not slating doctors at all. They're doing their job perfectly. But for me,
Yeah.
particularly when it came to like stress and like hormones, I've really struggled to get diagnosis that I need, because it's been misdiagnosed as something else, because there's a lot of crossover with so many different things.
God, yeah. I mean, right, like I come from the mental health field, and it's still, even when you have the knowledge and you have the like access to the resources, it's still really hard to navigate, right? Like, I think I told you last year, I hired a hormone nutrition specialist because even though I've done really well to manage my stress levels, and then we'll talk about this in a minute, like what to do in terms of like how to better manage your stress response, and lower those cortisol levels. Like, it's a lot of lifestyle habit changes. But like, you still need to like navigate the waters, because life is ever changing and there's different seasons, right? Sometimes there's some really low stress seasons and sometimes really high stress seasons. And so it's about really, really cultivating self-awareness around that, and then giving yourself grace when you're in kind of like hard moments, which is hard to do when you're feeling like crap. So
No, I know, exactly. And so on that then, what would your advice be to the TINAH Talk listeners, to their top tips for managing the stress hormone cortisol?
yeah, so I think, right, like I'm not a therapist, and I don't, do therapy. I'm no longer in the mental health field, but just from my experiences and then from research and all that together, I would say it comes down to kind of three. Well, I know you said three, but three, maybe four top categories. First and foremost, it would be nervous system management, right? And that is how our body is responding between that sympathetic and parasympathetic state. And it is something that we can consciously manage, right? So that looks like being able to do a little bit of breath work, where we can kind of like slow down our body and like settle into that relaxed state. That can be going for walks. That could be being out in nature and fresh air, doing a little bit of yoga. Those are just some really brief examples of nervous system management. Number two would definitely be mindset and emotional management. So I think we briefly touched on it, but like life is hard and there are a lot of things that are outside of our control. And so it's really being able to change that mindset state from like fixed to growth, and recognizing, what can we focus on that is within our control? And for the things that are outside of our control, how can we reframe it so it doesn't totally stress us out? I mean, there's always going to be some level of stress with things outside of our control, but, I think we talked about this before we hopped on this call, is like, a lot of our stress often, aside from immediate things in our face, comes from worrying about the past or stressing about the future. And with like mindset management, when we look at past events, that's more so about like, how can we take the lessons that we learned from difficult moments in our past and how can we carry it forward to live a better life or live in a way that feels better for us, right?
Yeah.
How can we create a new narrative that doesn't, I mean, it doesn't change the situation, but it's a little bit more supportive and encouraging for us that we can carry forward with us. And for future things, it's about identifying, okay, what am I worrying about and how can I walk through this process of worst case scenario, best case scenario? How can I plan accordingly just to make sure that I'm showing up in the way that I want to prevent what I'm worrying about? And then allowing ourselves grace for when like shit goes wrong, when we, quote unquote, fail at stuff. And that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But so that's number two. And then number three is more about like physical body management, right? Like, are we getting enough sleep? Are we taking care of ourselves in that way? Is our diet supporting us, right? Like a lot of people don't realize how much nutrition affects both mind and body. And so, right, like for example, limiting alcohol to a certain degree or regulating your caffeine intake, but making sure you're getting natural prebiotics and probiotics in your food, right? In the sleep hygiene routine, sort of deal, and just getting body movement to release the physical stress that is built up in your body. Oh, and then I think back to number two, because I mentioned emotional management, and that's really about learning how to let yourself feel your feelings, which can be terrifying, and knowing how to cope with emotions when you really are in it, and having habits and processes around that. And so all three of these things, they really all come down to habits and routines. They're lifestyle methods. It's not just a take a pill, I feel better, or do this one thing and I feel better. It's about creating a consistent routine around the management of nervous system, mind, emotions, and body.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I think they're all things that I've tried to implement. I think the challenge that I think a lot of people that are stressed have is that they think they don't have time to implement quite a lot of these things. And I also think it feels overwhelming because you've said a lot there. Like it's like you've got to think about your mind, you've got to think about your emotions, you've got to think about your physical body, you've got to think about your diet, your alcohol intake, all of the different things. And it can feel when you're first starting out really overwhelming.
Right.
To figure out like what else can you do to decrease your like cortisol levels. So I think it's like one of those things where you've got to take it step by step and go like what do you think is impacting you the most, like what is going to give you the most return for the little input that you're going to have to give, because you don't want to go all in and be like, right, I'm going to do the breath work, I'm going to change my diet, I'm going to do the alcohol, I'm going to do all of these things, because you're going to get really overwhelmed, and then that's probably going to cause you even more stress because you're stressed about the fact that you haven't been able to change all of these things. So I think, what would your advice be like to somebody that's like, I don't have time to sit there and breathe, for example, because I know so many people don't. I actually had a conversation with somebody that I'm living with at the moment the other day, and he was like, I'm really trying to get into meditation. And he was like, we were talking about meditation because he knows that I'm quite into meditation and I've got my meditations up to like 15-20 minutes, sometimes half an hour. He was like, I can only fit into two minutes a day. And I was like, 2 minutes in your day, you have got how many? I can't even remember how many hours there are in a day, but that's a tiny portion of your day. So what advice would you give someone like that hasn't got the time to implement some of these things?
So first and foremost, that idea that we don't have enough time, more or less, is total bullshit, right? You make time for the things that are important to you. And so if you really are serious about working on your mental well-being and your mental wellness and mental health in general, you can you can create a 5-minute window to do something for yourself. It's more about identifying where in your already busy schedule is an ideal place for you to implement something that you can stay consistent with at a very like basic minimum action, right? So I know we haven't talked about, what I do, and you can read about what Sophie and I do in the description, but I do high performance coaching. So I work with business owners and I take a lot of my psych background and I focus on like personal performance alongside business performance for their operations. one of the two things I start with my clients always, and they always come to me, they're super stressed out because they're overloaded in their business. And they've, they're at a high level and they've got a lot going on. So, technically they don't have the time, right? The two things that we always start with: sleep, and then I give a breathing exercise for nervous system management. Those are the two things, hands down. How can we adjust their sleep schedule so that they're getting a little bit more sleep, or sleep that works best for them in a way that works best for them? And then finding somewhere in their already daily routine of where can we squeeze in 5 minutes to do square breathing, also known as box breathing. But this is a really strong, powerful practice to help you move yourself from that really activated, sympathetic state into the relaxed state, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. And we can link in the show notes to like a very easy practice for square breathing. But like, that would be, if you're wondering where to start, those are the two places I would start: getting your sleep a little bit more under control, and then doing a 5-minute square breathing practice, ideally minimum 3 times a week. If you were to do it, like ultimate ideal goal, 5 times a week, you still get your weekend to fuck around and do whatever.
Yeah, you don't have to do it every day. Exactly. I think it's just like trying to incorporate, and that was the advice I remember you gave me when I was in that situation where I was in this fight or flight stage. You were like, well, what can you do like after you brush your teeth? Like, you can sit and breathe for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
What can you do before you go to bed? Well, just turn your phone off and like do the things that are already in your routine, but just like incorporate that something extra, just tweak it slightly. It's all about pivoting it. And I think that's what we're trying to do with TINAH. When we launch the marketplace, we're going to be showing you like the different routines and things, that products and services maybe that you could add into that routine to support you on dealing with some of the challenges that you might be facing in your mental well-being. And that's kind of the point of this, of TINAH, point of the platform. We are going to be recommending you what tweaks you might want to make, and then what products or apps, anything like that you might want to use to actually aid you on that journey.
Yeah. I mean, and just to give you guys a little caveat, or like a little reminder, you start to see results for this stuff when you do it long term in a consistent way. It's not a one and done solution, but I mean, hey, like, life is a long journey, and so you want to be on top of it with your own mental wellness and your mental health. It's ever changing, and so you want to make sure you have the resources there available and kind of working in the background so that you have something to fall back on when shit really does hit the fan.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's given us a good overview on like what stress is, how people can kind of manage it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at all, like on how we can decrease stress?
No, I mean, yeah, for decreasing stress and cortisol levels, it's those key areas: nervous system management, mindset and emotional management, and kind of your physical management. Recommendation: 2 places to start: sleep and doing a little bit of breathing, or right, like you can do walking and stuff with that. You just want to do a shorter kind of a brief thing you can introduce into your day. Stress will always be there, but it's just about how you think about it and how you approach it and take care of yourself throughout the experience.
Totally. Makes sense. I think there's a lot of things there that people can take away.
Well, if that is all for today, we just want to say thank you for listening to our episode. If this did resonate with you, be sure to give us a like. And we would love to hear your feedback in the comments about maybe other topics you'd like to hear more about. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on socials. All the details can be found in the episode description below. And just a friendly reminder, we are not a replacement for professional services. Make sure if you are needing support at this time and you're not in a good way, reach out to, professionals in your community and seek support there. And just remember, you hold the power to heal. And so until next time, you've got this.